I started my first digital marketing agency back in 2001. And I've got to be honest, I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I winged it from the start. I had a heady inspiration to build a huge marketing agency based on my naive idea that people would be knocking down my door to buy my products and services from me. But it became pretty obvious to me pretty quickly that that wasn't going to happen. I had to go out and knock doors and learn how to sell to actually figure out how to get my business going. Now, that was all very exciting and very scary, I guess. But to be honest, the biggest thing that I had to figure out was how to run a business, how to actually deal with the customers when I got them, how to charge them, and how to figure out what the best way of charging them was. Now, that might sound pretty straightforward, but it's not actually as obvious as you think, because when I first started out, I went down the traditional route that what most agency owners do, whereby you charge an upfront fee, which is effectively a setup fee or a design fee for a website, which is significant to cover the amount of time that you put into that setup process. And then you charge a small monthly, and you try and get that monthly as big as you can as a retainer. But typically, any work that's done thereafter gets charged ad hoc. That's certainly the way I did it. Now, we're going back 2001 when I first set up. And I didn't really know any better. And because I was so busy trying to get new customers and constantly add to my customer list day by day, week by week, month by month, that model I never really examined. And I did that for many years. And in 2008, we hit a big recession. So I've been running my business for 7 years at this point, and all of my customers had come through the process as described with this big upfront fee and then a very small retainer. So my residual income from those retainers was relatively small, and it was by no means anywhere near enough to have something that I could rely on or cover the wages or all the overheads. It was just a little small retainer, nice to have. So in 2008, some of you may remember of it, some of you may have heard about it. It was a huge recession. It was a global recession, and the whole world went nuts back in 2008. It was my first real experience of owning a business that had grown to some size. I had a decent team, had some great customers. I had what looked like a solid business, but it's my first experience of what happens when you go through a recession with a business that hasn't got that monthly recurring revenue model. And I have to say, it was really, really tough. It was a real eye-opener. And I remember, as I didn't have that many customers either, so I probably had 20 customers in total, and they would give me the business ad hoc, and obviously I was trying to get new customers on board, doing it in a traditional sort of pitch process, as was the case back then. And so when the recession hit, these customers that I had started tightening their budgets. They started thinking twice about spending this large sum of upfront money on any project, this setup fee, this design fee, and they started tightening their belts. And they started thinking twice about whether it was a good idea to use me. And the recession was then the reason that my business started to contract in revenue. And my customers were using the recession as that excuse. Obviously, in hindsight, I look back and realise that they were making as big a mistake as I was by not investing in marketing. When you go into recession, investing in marketing is one of the best things you can do during a recession, because you can mop up the business from your customers who aren't spending money on their marketing. So for me, I ended up having a business that was hugely reduced and left me, because I hadn't got this recurring revenue to rely on, left me really worried and searching for new customers and trying to get business out of my existing customers where nobody wanted to play the game with me. As a result of that, I ended up to make redundancies. I had to make some of my best friends redundant during that time. It was absolutely horrendous, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, because in order to keep my business going, I couldn't continue with all those big overheads. And this went on, that recession went on for a while. In fact, we didn't really come out of it till 2010, 2011. And if I'm being honest, the thing that pulled me through that recession was the fact that I had other businesses that I'd set up that kept me going. But more importantly, the biggest thing that happened was I changed my business model. And that business model, which I use to this day, is the business model that I now teach all of the digital marketers that come my way through the Blam partnership program. Any agency owners that are out there watching this, I urge you to think of this model, because to this day I still see people making the mistake that I made, where you've got a handful of customers where you're charging them large upfront fees, your retainers are much too small, and as soon as trouble comes, and it will in business, these people stop spending with you and you haven't got enough recurring to keep things moving. So back in 2009, 2010, I changed my business model to a monthly recurring revenue model. And that means that I reduced massively what the setup fee was, or the design fee, but my recurring revenue went up quite a lot. And what I found was that by doing this, not only was it much easier to get customers, because without that big commitment up front, customers are much more willing to come on board and make the commitment. But not only that, your recurring revenue goes up and the customers become much more sticky. So as a result of switching my model, I got a lot more customers, I got much more recurring revenue, which within no time at all made up for the lack of the upfront fees that I was getting, which were much less frequent, and I ended up building a much stronger model that meant that when the next recession came, and it did, people were much less likely to cut their costs because they're used to paying their monthly fee. The last thing they're going to do is cut off their website when they're in a recession. It's usually the last thing that they turn off. That recurring revenue comes in, and so during a recession, because I've got more customers, a lot more customers than I had before, even if a few of them do cancel in a recession, it still doesn't hurt anywhere near as much, because you've got the volume spread across many more customers. MRR, monthly recurring revenue, in the agency space is the holy grail. It's what I teach all Blam partners, and it is the thing that will help you grow quicker